All right. So my name is Jamie Perez. I am a mother of two small children and a wife, and I live in Georgia. So I live in a small town. It's called Oxford. I, however, grew up in Florida. I am from Puerto Rican and Dominican descent, and my parents moved to Florida when I was young, and so I grew up there my whole life. Very suburb. I grew up in the same house 20 years. I lived my entire life in the same house, same school, same friends, same church. I didn't move around much. I'm a second generation Seventh day Adventist. And so, it was a pretty solid time growing up. And I never really, a lot of times, sadly, a lot of times, youth in the church have grown up in the church and have never really had a true come to Jesus moment and really just go to church because their parents bring them there at a disadvantage almost because you kind of just go through the motions. And so I had never, as a young girl, I remember my dad telling me I couldn't do stuff because Ellen G. White said I couldn't do stuff. And so that just made me very rebellious towards Ellen G. White. And I praise God for the journey that he took me on, kind of came full circle, and I was able to understand and appreciate things for myself. And so I just kind of want to share with you guys how I got to where I am now. I live in, like I said, in Oxford, Georgia, on a 25-acre farm with two other families. And I raised my chickens and goats and donkeys, and who knows how we ended up here. So I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about that with you guys. So like I said, I grew up in Florida and I've been married for 8 years. My husband's family was always a little bit more radical. I remember we grew up in the same church. So I've known my husband and his family since I was 4 years old. And I remember during Y2K in the year 2000, when everything was going on, his family, they gathered all of their belongings, and they were like, they were a family that was pretty well off and doing well here. His dad worked. His mom was a stay-at-home mom. They had 4 kids, teenagers at that. And during Y2K, his dad had a dream that the Lord told him he needed to leave. And he shut down his business and gathered up his entire family and moved to the Dominican Republic. He had a farm there. He had a big farm there. And so he had, it's up on like the highest mountain in the Caribbean, and it's a beautiful property. And he had the Lord pressed on his heart that he needed to move there. And his wife, in her, she's, her godly spirit, she's like, well, that's the Lord told you, then let's move. And they uprooted their entire family. And I remember we went to the same church. I remember all the people were always like, man, that guy must have gone crazy. Like, I don't know what happened. And, thank God we're all still here long after Y2K. But they've always kind of been a little bit more off the beaten path than I have. And, fast forward all these years, after 21 years after that happened, my husband still says that he is the man he is today because of that move. And he is so grateful that his parents did that, because it really changed the trajectory of his life. And his siblings all speak very highly of it as well. So it was a beautiful experience for them. And it kind of, for me, having grown up in the same place, it was really odd, but it's really cool because they do have that kind of more adventurous and more like, we'll go where God wants us, more like a bit of like that trust that I see in them is something that kind of only comes from having heard those voices followed and seeing how that plays out in your life to be such a blessing. And so back in 2016, I was pregnant with our first daughter, and my husband says, we need to move to Georgia. And I'm like, I don't know. I've been in Florida my whole life. I don't think so. And he's like, no, the Lord has kind of impressed upon my heart that we have, his dad had this property that his dad is a wholesaler of cars. And so he had this dealership that he had bought 100 years ago, and it was just sitting there doing nothing. And my husband had been praying about it because they were paying taxes on it every year, and it was starting to become kind of a nuisance. And the Lord impressed upon him, his brother, and his dad that they should open up a dealership. And so we moved here and we fixed up the property and moved and did that. And it's beautiful to see, because that was literally just like a vehicle that God used in order to get us here. because I don't think I would have ever moved to Georgia otherwise. Because that window is, when we had the dealership and all that, was very short lived. But then we were able to kind of all come together here. So his parents had lived in North Carolina, his brother was in Florida, we were in Florida, and then we all like came together here. And then once we were together here, my husband's cousin, he had 3-year-old twins at the time, and they had just moved to a 100-acre property in South Carolina. And so since it was close by, we took a few trips out there, and we would go often, and we're like, wow, this is just so nice. And they had read the book that had really convicted them into moving towards the country was, it's a Spanish book, but it's the same in English. It's just called Country Living. And it was a small little book. And we would go out there, and I was like, man, this is really nice. Like my mom grew up in the country in Puerto Rico, and I would visit often in the summers. And so I just really enjoyed that lifestyle. And they had chickens, and they had cows, and they had just all the space, and it was so quiet and so peaceful. So like going out there was very inspirational. And then she shared that book with me, and I started reading it. And for me, like that book really was what changed everything, because it's just so clear. Sister White talks, and she's like, it's right there. It's all laid out. It's like, this is the blessing that people receive from being in the country, children raised in the country. For me, I was a first-time mom. And when I read where she talks about how it's 10 times harder to raise kids in the city than it is in the country, I'm like, I'm terrified of being a mom. I'm already scared, and I already think it's going to be so complicated. So if something could be, if it's 10 times harder in the city, that means in the country it's 10 times easier. That's what I need in my life, is 10 times easier. So I was pregnant at the time, and my mother-in-law also received the same impression from the Holy Spirit. And she called everyone together. My husband has 4 siblings, and she called all of us together. And so she's like, the Lord has impressed on my heart that we need to move to a farm. And I was actually around the same, I was right on board, because I had also been reading the book. And so when I heard her say that, I was so excited. I'm like, yes, let's do it. Some of the other siblings were not in their same place in the journey, but they all were like, I was the first one to have kids. My sister-in-law was also pregnant, and we knew we wanted to raise the kids together. So they were like, well, maybe we won't go right now, but it is something we want to do in the future. So we started our journey just starting to look for properties. And we started to look, and we started to look, and we didn't have any restrictions. We're like, God, wherever you want to take us, like that's where we'll go. We looked in Kentucky, and we wanted to stay like Southeast, just because of the gardening and the planting. We were like, it might be easier if we're kind of on the warmer side of life. And so we looked at Kentucky, we looked in North Florida. We didn't want to get too far into South Florida because of the heat. We looked at Alabama, we looked in Tennessee. And so we were just very open with our scope. But being that it was 4 different families, everyone had a list that was from here to the door long about what they wanted in a property. You grew up, and your whole life you're kind of dreaming of what you wanted your future to look like. And so everyone had different restrictions. And I met with a realtor, and I'm like, okay, well, here's these 28 things we need on our property. So we need something with this and that and this and that. And it was a lot. And the realtors, I would laugh telling the realtors, and the realtors would laugh back, because they were like, wow, you guys are very specific. And I'm like, yeah, the thing is, it's a lot of us, so it's kind of hard to have everyone be like on the same page as far as what they want. We learned a lot throughout the journey. Like we had wanted something up in the mountains, but my brother-in-law was like, oh, I want something in the mountains. And then we learned that the Lord just sends you people, because it was like the lady we were working with, she grew up on a farm, so she knew about that stuff, and the realtor. And so she's like, hey man, if you guys want to plant stuff, you can't do that up by the mountains, because the earth is very rocky. There's a lot of rocks, and you're not going to have like very good luck with the planting. So we're like, oh, good to know. We saw some mountain properties, and it was like everything was sloped like this. So it was like there wasn't going to be any areas to garden. And then also we wanted something with a spring, like with fresh water of some sort, some type of water source that wasn't connected to, the government or anyone. And so that is also difficult to find if you're going too high up in the mountains, because streams and rivers, those things run down the mountains. So it's like, oh, so you learn things along the way. So, fast forward, we drove 2, 3 hours, 1 hour, like we spent a lot of time, and it was hard. And oftentimes it was frustrating because I'm like, God, if this is what you want for us, why isn't this happening? Like, we're willing. My mother-in-law sold her house in North Carolina. She moved in with my brother-in-law into this small house with his kids, her, like all of them in this small house. We're making sacrifices. We're saving money. Like, what is it? Like, why isn't this happening if this is what you called us to do? And so we waited, and we looked and we looked and we looked and we looked, and we spent 3.5 years searching for our property. So it was definitely not something that it was like, well, God called us to do this and we're there. Some journeys are different. Some people, they do kind of have that moment. They sell everything and they're able to find something right away. That was not the story for us. That was not the case for us. So we would go to different properties, and I would love it, or my husband would love it. And then my brother-in-law would be like, nope, I'm not living here. And then, my mother-in-law would love something, and then I'd be like, yeah, I don't like that. So we wanted something that had at least 2 dwellings, like 2 living situations. And then that one house would be big enough for at least one family to share, because there were 3 families that were ready right away to move into the country. And then the other one would come later. So, we were like, there's so many things to take into account that we hadn't even thought about. Like, my husband works from home. So does my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law. So we needed good internet, which is not something that I had even thought about. And a lot of these country homes that were very far out in the country didn't have good internet. And then my sister-in-law's husband, he has to work, and he doesn't work from the internet. So we wanted to be sufficiently close to something that would allow him to have a job. And so we had, like I said, this long list of things that we needed. And I mean, after 3 years, I was definitely losing hope. I was frustrated because I'm like, my child, she's growing. I wanted her to grow up on a farm. I wanted her to grow up in the country. And she's already 2 years old. First, so she was 1, and then she was 2, and then she was 3. And I started to get, very anxious. But I'm like, well, we had all prayed about it. And individually in our minds, we all kind of had a date as to like, hey, if this doesn't happen by then we'll probably just kind of like separate and then regroup later. And honestly, God is so good, because if that had happened, as a lot of I'm sure, it's like when people separate, it's really hard for them to kind of come back together. Everyone gets involved in their own lives everywhere else. And those are the dangers of the city and of being close to things. It's like you just get caught up. You just get caught up, and before you know it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 years. Like, what am I doing here? This wasn't the plan. But it's, it's very difficult to kind of stay focused on those things when everyone's doing their own thing. So it was nice to be close, because we were all kind of keeping each other accountable. And now I can see, so when we came to this property, I found it, like, I'm telling you, we would check Land of America. There was all these websites we would check. And one day we were on the way to our cousin's house, the one with the farm. And I'm like on realtor.com, and here shows up this property, even though I would religiously check realtor.com, this property I had never seen before. And we had looked at all sorts of budgets, because we're like, oh, if we're 4 families, theoretically we could afford, something on the higher end, since we're all going to be helping each other. And it's just crazy, because God is so good. It's like, we found this property, and it was on the super low end of our budget. Like, we were like, oh, it was like suspiciously cheap, 25 acres. So we drove by, and the first day we just drove by, like, looking at the area, since we didn't have an appointment or anything. And then the second time, my husband and his brother and his mom were on the way to see another farm, and they passed right in front of it. And so they're like, let's go in. And the gentleman that lives here was here. He was super nice. Like, yeah, come on in. You guys can look around. I don't mind. He was cutting grass or something. He's like, don't worry about it. So he didn't really tend to them, but he just let them look around. And I mean, I would say we saw in the course of those 3 years, probably like 100 properties. And this was the only one that everyone just was like, oh, this is it. It was like 4 different families, and this is the only property that everyone was like, so that everyone said, yes, we could totally live here. there was always someone giving some reasons on all the other ones. And this was the only one where everyone was like, oh yeah, this is it. And I mean, it's not because it was like so fancy or anything like that. It was just kind of something about it just really resonated with us. And then turns out later on, when we started trying to like do all the process to buy it, the bank wouldn't have approved us for any of those other higher priced ones. So it's like God really knew if this was what we needed. And it has a main house. It's a mobile home that the gentleman like added on to. And then he had in a barn, he had converted the barn into like a small apartment for his daughter. And it was, it was jerry rigged, but it worked. It had septic and it had light. And my father-in-law is very, very handy. So once we moved here in 4 months, they built his daughter a house there, a beautiful house for her and her family. And so it was just him and one other gentleman working day and night to build that house so that she can come. She was moving from North Carolina and her lease was going to expire. So and she was pregnant. So we were on a time crunch. So when we found this property, it was about an hour from where we were. And we went through and everything just kind of fell into place. And it was really just perfect for us. And now I could see God's hand moving through all those properties that we didn't get. And then also the time that it took us to find, like, I can see the growth that God put us through in order to get here, to get to a place mentally and spiritually where we felt happy, just a blessing. Like I don't know that had we done it sooner, it would have felt like a blessing over an obligation, just because we knew it was what we were supposed to do. But then by the time it actually did happen, it was like, oh no, this is what we want to be. This is where we want to be. So like, one thing when I remember when I talked to my family about it, one of the questions here was like, how do you kind of approach it with other people, with your family who maybe doesn't have the same views as you? And, that's something that for me was really interesting because like I said, I live here with my husband's family. It's his sister and then his parents, his brother, their family, and then us. So it's not really with my paternal family, like my family I was born into, right? We're all family now. But so when I told my family, they were like, I think your husband's family has kind of gotten a grasp on you and maybe you're having one of those moments. And I'm like, no, like and even though we are Adventist and we have, my family is Adventist too, but they just didn't see it the same way. The Lord reveals different lights depending on where you're at in your spiritual journey and what you really need. He gives us all different convictions in his everlasting mercy because, we can't all handle everything at the same time that everyone else can. And so I've always just been very grateful because I feel like God has always met me where I'm at and given me exactly what I needed as the loving father that he is. And so when I spoke to my family about it, they weren't exactly on board. But I kept on, making a point of like, this is God's impression on what God has impressed on my heart. Like, this has not been given to me. This is not anyone influencing me. Like, think about, how nice it would be for the kids to have like all this open space and to be able to, like, they love being outside already. And we just have a small yard. Like, it would be so nice for them to have so much space and think about the lessons that they will learn through the animals and through nature and just being able to see these things and be so close up to them. And when you put the kids in there, most people get on board. So grandparents usually are drawn by that. And so, and it's really just been, it's also been kind of being tactful and sharing things at the right time. Farm life is not without its struggles. And then I don't, so I try to be tactful as well as to like what I share with my family. I'm not saying only share all the good and not the bad, but just being tactful so that they don't necessarily form any negative opinions about what we're doing here. And so when I started reading and I started being convicted that this was it, I knew it applied to my family. One of the questions, how did you know it applied to your family? It's like, I knew it applied to my family because we had so I left the church when I was a teenager and I came back. And for me, something that has sustained me and has, like I had mentioned before with my dad using Ellen G. White as an excuse as to why I couldn't do certain things I wanted to do as a rebellious teenager. One of the things that brought me back and sustained me in church and in my relationship with God was, we are to be different. God has called us to stand out, not to fit in, not to be like the world, not to imitate the world. It is to be different. And I remember as a teen struggling with different things, jewelry and dressing, and I remember that not being addressed. Like, I didn't feel that made an impact. Like, no one ever told me that. Like Joshua, he says, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. You are to be different. And so I knew that if I wanted different results for my kids, because I didn't like what I saw from the world's kids, if I wanted different results, then I had to do things differently. And so that was really, for me, what was like the biggest conviction, is like, we are to be different. We can't allow all of these influences from the world to encroach us or our children. We are, or our families. Like, we have to stand out. We have to be different. How can I be in communion with God? And I grew up Adventist, and I was always very involved in the Pathfinder ministry. And I remember when I would go camping, and I remember when I would go camping as a young person, how just nice it felt to be out in nature with your friends and to be doing something different. And then I remember the impact as an adult when I was a counselor, and we would take all those kids' cell phones away, and we'd be like, hey, this is time to connect with your peers and with God and with nature. And I could see the impact and the change and the difference that it had, just those 2 days that we were out there on their lives. And so I knew, I'm like, if you could have that all the time, then why wouldn't you? If I could make that happen for my children, if I could have it be so that they are excited to commune with God, then I don't want to miss the opportunity to give that to them. And while we were in the waiting period during those 3 years, there was a lot of work to be done. And financially, we made cuts. The hardest thing, I think, of being kind of away from things is that you feel like you need all the things. So, like, being further away from the stores makes it so that you have to plan more accordingly. Okay, Sunday's grocery day. Let me plan ahead as to my menu, as to what I need to buy, because you're not just able to run every, whim to the grocery store. You have to kind of be more strategic. And so during the time that we were waiting for the doors to open up, we did do a lot of that, like meal planning and a lot of helping each other. Like, here on the farm, we all cook together. So, like, okay, you'll cook this, I cook this, and this person cooks this. And then we kind of come together and we eat together. And so we would do a lot of that when we were living towards in the suburbs city area as well. And then financially, like I said, my mother-in-law made huge sacrifices, and I'll forever be grateful for those sacrifices. She sold her house. She lived in a small room at her son's house, with his family, and she made those sacrifices in order to have that down payment to be able to do here. We all made different sacrifices. My husband started, looking into different ways to generate other income with real estate and different things like that, and learning. And I was alone with the baby a lot while he was, doing these things, that, like, all these real estate things and fixing and working double jobs in order to be able to have that opportunity come when it came, in order for all of us to be ready. So it reminds me a lot of, like, that story where where God tells the Israelites, like, make your tents bigger and the blessing is going to come when you make those tents, when you make the provisions. Noah didn't build the ark having seen water. He didn't build the ark having ever even known what rain was. He built the ark, and then the rain came. God didn't show him the rain and then told him to build the ark. So, like, we have to build our ark, and the rain is going to come. The same way God promised it to Noah, he's promised it to us. These are things that he's calling us to do. And if we make the right preparations, and we're willing and our heart is open to the opportunity, it's going to come. And so we wanted to be, financially in a place, all of us taking care for our credits, trying not to, like, and it was 3 years, like, oh, don't buy a car. The realtor had told us different little things, like, so that when the time came to get the loan, you were in a better position to get approved. So there was a lot of those types of preparations. And then, spiritually, for me personally, after I read that Country Living book, it was a big eye opener, and I didn't feel that I needed anything else. But like I had mentioned, there's 4 families. And so throughout that time, my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, they were one of the ones who were more like hesitant about it. They found a church. It's just crazy how everything fell together. But they ended up finding a church that's pretty close to here, like 30 minutes away. So it was kind of halfway in between our old house and then this house. And they just loved that church, and they fell in love with all the members and all just the programming, and everyone was so welcoming to them. And I feel like that helped them a lot, because once they knew that the farm was closer to that church, they were like, okay, well, maybe we can see ourselves moving. At first, it was like, oh, to the area. And then it was like, once the kids started to grow, that was another thing. Had we moved when I was pregnant, those relationships, those bonds between our children wouldn't have been there, which was a big pulling factor for them, because their son and my daughter are a year apart, and they've been in each other as far as their whole life they can remember. They've been together and they love each other. It's so funny to hear them. Like, my daughter's 4 and she'll be like, I'm going to marry Omri when we're bigger. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, that's your cousin. But she doesn't know. But they're so close and they love each other so much. And so as parents, it was so hard, like, for us, because we're like, we don't want to separate them. We want them to have that bond. And so that was a big pulling factor, kind of keeping us all together as well. And as far as like our location and where we found the farm, I mentioned it's just, it was just divine providence. We were really open to anything. We went to see so many different properties. So I'm going to kind of talk about different little things that I didn't expect living on a farm and living in this lifestyle. So I expected, I was like, oh, it'll be really, we're all together, we're going to help each other, we all get along well, it's gonna be great. But that, it's hard. And when you share, living with people is hard. And when you share with so many different, so like one thing that had also pushed us to like be together was in the book. She talks about how like several different families can come together and buy property because so much work. So I did not expect how much work it is. Beautiful work, fulfilling work, really it is. But I did not expect how much work. It's like there's always something to be done. And it just makes me reflect back on Adam and Eve when they were, first kicked out of the garden. It's like, now you'll till the soil, and that's with the sweat of your forehead. That's what you're going to eat with. And it has really been true to me, because I'm like, it's not saying that we don't go to the grocery store. We have a small garden and we do eat from there, but it's just more like, if you're not working, God doesn't like a lazy man. And it's like, if you're not working, then everything's falling apart. So it's like, we always have to be like constantly doing things. There's a fence that needs to be repaired. There's a donkey that got loose. The other day I spent 2 hours chasing these donkeys because they had gotten out and gone to a neighbor's house, and she didn't know they were our donkeys, and she called animal control. So I go over there with the bucket of sweet feed and the rope. And these donkeys, so they were left here by the previous owner because they wouldn't get onto the horse carriage. So they are the most stubborn donkeys you will ever meet. I had no idea donkeys were so stubborn. I had always heard the term, but when you're experiencing it firsthand, it is so different and so much more frustrating. So yeah, I spent at our neighbor's house, I spent like 2 hours, me and my brother-in-law, chasing these donkeys around. And I'm like, I've never done anything to be nice to them. So why they're so feral is beyond me. But I'm like, come here, sweeties, like with the bucket. And every time I would get close, I didn't learn lassoing when I was living in the city of Central Florida. So I'm like trying to throw the rope onto them. So there's been a lot of interesting challenges that have come with, and one of the biggest ones too has been, since we are so many different families and so many different personalities, I can see firsthand when the Bible says like iron sharpens iron. It is like, it is one of those things, honestly. It's just like a lot of prayer for love and patience, and just learning to deal with different characters, like different people's characters. And there's even a lot of cultural differences. We're all Hispanic, but it's like my sister-in-law, her husband's Mexican, And so they do things very differently, and culturally they're very different from like Caribbean people. So it's been a learning process. And they lived in North Carolina. So even though they've been married for a while, it's like, we didn't know him like that. You get to know people on a different level and you're all sharing a space. So that's been, I think, for me personally, one of the biggest challenges, just because I tend to be a very like independent person and very like kind of keep to myself a bit more as far as like with my, like I like my space. And so right now, my husband and I actually live with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. So that's been really interesting as well. And it's also been such a growing process because my mother-in-law is like a very spiritual woman. Just, she's done the work, and she reads, and she's just a very spiritual woman. And so it's been a journey for me because I look up to her a lot in that regard. And so it's been nice to have like that accountability from her, also like that person to bounce things off of. And so I can see, and just like I said, with all the work, like I can just see what a blessing it is to just be able to be here all together. So this summer, my husband and I plan to buy a house to put on the back of the property. So like I had mentioned, it's 25 acres. I have some pictures I'll share with you guys in just a moment. It's 25 acres, and right now it's the main house and then my sister-in-law's house. And so we share this house, the main house, with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. And then we've been, saving money, and, with the cities, there's a lot of ordinances and different hoops you have to jump through in order to build. So hopefully by this summer, we can start our little house in the back, and we've gone kind of back and forth on what we want. And we're still in a very prayerful place because I'm like, maybe we do a tiny house, maybe we do like some type of mobile home. And so we're just kind of still, it's a never ending journey as far as how God works on us. But like even just recently, my husband and I were talking about it, and I'm like, maybe we need, we thought this was going to be very temporary. Like, oh yeah, we'll live with your mom for 4 or 5 months and then we'll have our own place. Nope. A year and a half later, we're still here. And I can see how, I'm like, maybe there's something he's working out in me, like, I don't know, like maybe it's a more humility, maybe it's more of that, not dependence on people, but like more acceptance of people, or more of people's help, living with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, like that's been really interesting and really different. And so maybe it's that, maybe it's, we don't know. So we're at the other end of it, but I can see that God is still working out different things in me. I'm like, maybe I'm not ready for a home. Maybe I have to set different expectations and depend more on God. And there's just different little things that we can see. And so even though I didn't plan to be living here this long in my mother-in-law's house, it's been what has happened. And once we get our house and once we finish, like, we'll be like, oh, I see why this kind of happened this way. So another thing, let's see, what is one thing that you may be missing on how to view the process? So I think that when I first started this journey, how I viewed the process was like, this is something that we're supposed to do, like, okay, God called us to do this, we have to do this, versus by the time it actually happened. And then also now that I'm here, I can see that I feel like this is something that I wanted. And so for me, something that was really helpful, and something, I'm in, like I had mentioned to Garrett, like I'm in Georgia. I'm in kind of central East Georgia. If anyone is near me, anyone's close to here, like, please, if you're even 2 hours, 3 hours, like, come see how we live, come to a farm, like, feel how nice it is. Like, that was one of the things that I feel helped me the most, like going to my husband's cousin's farm. It was like, oh, wow, like this is something that I want, not only because God wants it for me, but for his desires to become my desires, is when I was able to just accept and be fully blessed by the process. So, it's like, oh, well, we're moving with your mom and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's easy to kind of find all these negative things, but it's like, when I experience all of these little things every day, that I'm like, wow, like, I'm not here because I have to be. I am here because this is where I choose to be. And there could be 100 other offers of different places on the table, and I would still choose our humble little farm, because it's really just been such a blessing. And I can see how God has used it to change and to develop my character in so many different ways, and that of my daughters. I'm homeschooling, planning to homeschool, right? I have a 4-year-old, so she's still on the young side, but I'm planning to homeschool them, and we've started, some curriculums and started to do things with my oldest, and the youngest. She likes it too. And really the education starts at 0 years old. So I've been doing that, and I'm like, wow, like it's just so nice, because in the books it talks about like talking about nature, taking a nature walk. And it's like, okay, we're going to go out the back door and here's our nature walk. And so that's been really nice. And it makes it 10 times easier than living in the city, just like the Spirit of Prophecy says, which is just such a beautiful thing. What advice would I give myself looking back to the beginning of this journey? Patience and prayer. Patience is so hard. I am the worst. Like, I am really bad at being patient. Like, I get a package and I open it in my car on my way down the driveway, coming down the driveway, I'm opening my package. Like, I'm not very good at the waiting thing. So for me, I don't know if God held us all off for 3 years just to teach me a lesson. If he did, I'm sorry to all of them, but the patience and just for me, like sometimes it's hard for me, like to not, like I'll be like, oh, we should have bought that one. We didn't buy that one because your brother said that he didn't like that one. And your brother's always, and it's like, if I would just have, even in that moment, like stop for a second and then like, we didn't buy that one because that wasn't the one God had for us. So really trying to see God and trusting God throughout the whole process, and like being calm, like God knows your heart. And if you don't make it to the city by the time your son is 10, like he's still going to bless you along the way. And because he knows that you're trying and he works all things together for good, it's like, it's going to happen because because he has convicted you and because it's on your heart and you're making it happen. You're trying to make it happen. It's going to happen. It is like just the fact that you guys are all here on a Saturday night, like it just shows so much. It shows where you want to be. It shows where your heart is. It shows where your mind is, and God's going to do it. Like he really is. And that would be like, if I could see my past self and give myself some advice, it would be like, Jamie, just calm down. He's doing it. You don't see it, but he's doing it. He really is. He's putting all the puzzle pieces together, and you won't be able to see it until you're at the end. We look through a hole this big when we're living our life, and it's like God's looking from a different perspective, and we can't see these things. But like now I look back and I can see them, right? Hindsight 2020. But in the moment, you don't see those things. And so if I could give myself one piece of advice, and if I could give you guys one, it's like, you're here, and that's half of the battle. That spiritual warfare is not going to be won by the enemy because you're here, and because you're making the effort, and because you are trying, and he sees you, and he's going to find you where you're at, and he's going to take you where he wants you to be. So that's kind of what I would tell myself, just to kind of not, for me, like I said, it was hard the waiting process was very, very difficult. But once it happened, I'm like, this is why all those other places didn't work out, it was because this is where we needed to be. And if we maybe could have afforded one of those more expensive properties, like that's fine. But like, it's been so nice because our mortgage is split amongst a few families, to have that lower cost of living, to not have that pressure, especially now during we moved in September, and then the coronavirus pandemic hit in March. And it was like, oh my God, thank you so. And my sister-in-law moved in December. No, she moved like January. And it was just like, thank you, because my daughter's life did not change. Like, they don't even understand that there's a pandemic out there, that the whole world that is on lockdown, and there's kids living in tiny apartments suffering because they can't go outside. Like, they don't have to do that. They don't have to go through that. Thank you because of your beautiful timing. And thank you because just all of these blessings that I probably wouldn't have seen before, and like I said, with the pandemic, my husband's salary got cut, and it was like, thank you, because we don't have to worry, because you gave us a property that wasn't our will, but yours. And it was within our means without us even knowing it. We were like, oh, there's 4 families. We could afford a $500,000 property. Like, what were we thinking? now I see it, and I'm like, thank you, Lord, because our property was $260,000, which was half of what we had been looking at. Like, talk about coming off that pedestal and humbling us. But because now I could see how, despite any salary cuts, my brother-in-law lost his job during the pandemic because he worked in like construction and landscaping. He lost his job during the pandemic, and he's been without work for a year. And they're able to survive off of his wife's part-time salary because we were, because God opened the door to bring us to not where we thought we should be at this mountain, $500,000 mountain cabin, but in where we really needed to be. And so it's just seeing all that throughout has just been so humbling. It really just has been so humbling for me, just to, and it's just been humbling and to make me so grateful. Like, it really does. It really does. And it's not what we want. It's really what he wants. And if you're here and you're looking and you're willing, he's going to make it happen in the way that he knows how. I don't know. How can I share like the PowerPoint, Sharon? I'd like to show you guys a few pictures.
Yeah, just, there should be a,
share screen. Oh, I see it. Look at me, right? Let me see. What can I find to share? Oh, okay. I see now. Okay, give me one quick second. Let me just pull it up on its own little thingy here.
Your testimony is really timely, Janie, because in this group, they're planning to do a country property tour with multiple families in a couple of months. Yeah.
Oh, well, you guys are more than welcome to come here. Like I said, I mean, this is God's property, not mine. And you guys are it would be so awesome. It would be so fun. Oh, just let me know so we can have everyone here and have everyone together. It would be awesome.
Well, they're planning to do it in New York, but since you open up Georgia,
we should do a Georgia one. Yes, you're in Georgia. Garrett's in Georgia. We should totally do a Georgia one.
I'm down.
Like Janie, she's my hermana. I like
it. Let me show you guys here. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Oh man, I don't work in corporate America, and so I haven't had the chance of using this Zoom thing too much, but this is really cool. Okay, so let me show you guys here. So this area, do you see the mouse too, or no?
Yes.
Yeah, you see it.
Yeah, okay. This area here, the gentleman that lived here before had a fence along here, and then we closed it up, and this is where we garden. So if you see this arch here, I'm sorry I don't have better pictures, but if you see this arch and this little road here, that's the driveway. So our driveway is really, really long, and it goes like this, and then you come in here, and then so we cleared this area for a garden. Back here we have dogs. You can see the dog house here. There's the horses, and then all these little sticks you see is where we planted fruit trees. So when we first moved, my in-laws were like, we have to plant the fruit trees right now. Like, we hadn't even moved our stuff in. And they're like, we have to plant the fruit trees right now. And this was our first farm challenge, right? We had our first farm meeting because they were like, we need to do it now. We're like, and then my husband and I are a little bit more like, hey, we got a plan. And my brother-in-law is like, we got to call a landscape architect so he can tell us like the nicest, most aesthetically appealing way to plant stuff. And it was like, I'm like, what? I don't want to complicate things that much. So it was really interesting to kind of like, this is our first farm project that was like so many different opinions. So it was quite fun. But here we have some fruit trees because we did plant them right away. They do need a few years in order to bear fruit. That was my mother-in-law and father-in-law's and persistence with it, why they were so insistent. And then my husband actually, so we didn't have at this time, we don't know anything about farm life, like we're city people. And so we moved here and we're like, well, we want to plant trees. Well, how, like, and so then my father-in-law went and bought, I believe it was like 40 trees, right? Okay, let's plant 2 or 3 trees. Nope, let's plant 40. So then we had to dig holes for all those trees. And we did not, and we're like, what? So my husband, we went and rented like an auger, and my husband dug like 90 holes by himself here in this plot, because my father-in-law also bought like 40 grape plants because he really likes grapes. So So it's been, like I said, it's been quite the journey. Everyone has kind of different gifts, and then so my father-in-law loves to grapes, so he went and bought tons of them, and we bought a bunch of fruit trees. And it's nice to be, even as far as like for me, I think what has been really cool about living on the farm too is that shared expenses. Because as you can imagine, the trees and all these plants, they got pricey, but it was nice to be able to share it between multiple families, to not have to take that load on our own. So we had made this the garden. I have better pictures. Oh, here's a view this was at sunrise. From my husband's office window. You can see we have a nice family of deer that come and visit, and we just love seeing them. They're so cute. Here's another one. Can you spot the deer here? There's a deer in there somewhere. Right here. Look at how cute he is. So I like deer. So there we have that little guy. This is also at sunrise. My husband wakes up early for his devotions, and then he sits at his desk, at his office desk, and this is what he sees. This is kind of the entrance to our property. So my husband and I are going to build like back here. So the property it's kind of like a hourglass shape. So it's like larger in the front, then it gets small towards the middle, and then gets larger again in the back. And then we have like I didn't put pictures of it. We have a creek that runs in the back, and then we have 2 spring-fed ponds back there. So that was check mark the water feature. We have 2 spring-fed ponds. That's where the horses drink and whatnot. And then we have that stream. So that's been nice. And then the property is on well water, which we also found to be beneficial because, we're not like off grid or anything like that yet, but it has been nice to have that water like separate. And we bought like a generator. We want to work on kind of being more prepared for, especially during this, we were able to see how controlling the government is. Once they gain control, they won't give it back. So we want to be more a little bit more self-sufficient. So we would like to do some solar in the future. And then, like I said, we have this well, and both houses that are on the property are on a well, and then the third one is going to be on a well too. And we were very blessed that the well is 40 feet deep. It's a bored well. So we don't have, we haven't had to dig too deep. Like, it seems like it's a very good area to do that. Oh, and then if you see here, this little gray area is our homeschool classroom and my sewing shop here. So we put that shed on our own, and then my father-in-law finished it on the inside. My father-in-law, my brother, and my husband, they finished it on the inside. Oh, I should have put pictures, but I didn't. But it's fine. It's a homeschool classroom and a sewing shed right now. Here are some horses. So we rescued these horses. We had no intention of having horses because none of us ride horses or know anything about horses. But my father-in-law had a friend who boards horses, and like this black guy specifically, his owner had stopped paying, so he stopped feeding him. So the horse was dying, and we were like, okay, well, we have grass, so please bring us a horse. We will take him off your hands. And he is so healthy and beautiful now. He's 23 years old, so he's quite on the older side of things. But our neighbor has a 30-year-old horse. All the time, I'm like, one day, we call it, his name is Pablo. And I'm like, one day, Pablo's just, I don't know what's going to, like, maybe one day he's not going to come back from the stream from drinking water. And then when I met our neighbor, she's like, oh, this is my horse, he's 30. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's 30. So that was quite interesting. But yeah, so this is Pablo, and then this is Frankie. We got her from a lady who was keeping her in her backyard, and then the city told her she couldn't anymore. So she's been very happy here. She likes to run. She's 12 years old, so she still has a long way to go with us. And then these are the 2 donkeys that I spent 2 hours chasing the other day. They apparently hate me, but they are here, and that's Emmy and Ellie. Here's the horses again. They love each other so much. It's so cool to see how much they ended up liking each other. Here are my daughters. So one thing I wanted to kind of talk about is I've always loved animals, and my mom, within our means of where we live, she always facilitated us having pets, and we had ferrets, and we had hamsters, and we had fish and birds and dogs and cats. So as much as we could have for the space that we were in. And so that was something that was always really important to me. Like, I wanted my girls to be around animals. And I love animals too. So here we are trying to win over the donkeys in the middle picture. My daughter there. We're constantly feeding them. They still have not come around. Here she is with a chicken. So when we first moved, the gentleman had left us 2 chickens, and I wanted more because I love chickens. So we bought some chickens, and here she is carrying one of our chickens. They love her, and she loves them. And then here on the right, you'll see her with my youngest daughter. So it's really cool because my youngest daughter, although she wasn't born here, like on the farm, she wasn't born like while we were here, but she remembers nothing else but the farm because she was only 10 months old when we moved. So it's really cool because it's like this will always just kind of be her home. And we live with her grandparents, and she adores them. So it's been a really, like even the days when I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of sharing this space, I see the joy in their eyes when they wake up. They just run, they take off straight to their grandparents' room, and they lay in bed with them and do their devotions with them. And I'm like, oh, this is what makes it worth it. Keep me humble, Jesus. And then here on the right, we have our goat. That is all of our pets that we've named have biblical names. So that one's Orpha, and then her sister is Ruth. She'll be maybe in another future picture. Let me see. Hey, why are you doing that sound? Did I click out of it? So here I am working, shoveling stuff. All the horses' stables need to be cleaned, and just such fun stuff that you did not think you'd be doing. There was a picture I left out. I was going to put it in. I'm like, I'm going to leave it out. But it was where I'm like scrubbing a chicken's butt. And I'm like, how has it come to this? But, God called us to care for all of our animals and for his creation. And so it's something I do with great joy, scrubbing my chicken's butt. But it's just things that you don't realize you have to do when you get into these commitments of owning these animals. So the chickens, when they, sometimes they get dehydrated, and then their poop, I hope that's okay, that word, their poop sticks to their feathers, and it can be dangerous to them. And so there was one chicken specifically that it kept happening to, Big Red. And so I had to grab her. My mom is from a farm. So she's like, no, Janie, you have to get her, you have to cut all the feathers on her butt and rinse off. I'm like, I have to do what? She's like, yeah, because otherwise she's going to get sick, and she's going to get the other chicken sick. And so I'm like, oh gosh. So, you cut the feathers, rinse all the poop off, and then it's quite interesting. Like my mother-in-law, it's so funny. My mother-in-law, when we first moved here, my mother-in-law, she's kind of a germaphobe, and so when we first moved here, she's like very hands off with all the animals, and that was almost 2 years ago. Versus like the other day, the chickens were getting into the garden, so you have to clip their feathers, and it's 46 chickens clipping all them feathers, and so my mother-in-law, like now she'll like grab them, and I'm like, oh, look at you, the Lord's working in you too. And she'll grab them now, and just kind of changing and really adapting to country life. Here, the girls with more chickens, I think they'll never be scared of chickens because they have definitely grown up with them. And so something that we try to do is just kind of everything that we're doing, like just take it outside. The winters are rough, but once it starts to warm up even a little bit, it's like, all right, outside, you're going to do these puzzles, we're going to do them outside. And my daughter specifically loves flowers. And so she has all her little flowers that she cares for. And she gets sad every time they die. Like every time a flower, like the actual flower dies, and I have to re-explain the cycle of it to her. But she cares so much for them, and then they start to bloom, and she's so happy. And then when the flower wilts, she's like, why is this happening? I'm like, it's the same, So re-explaining those things and taking those opportunities to draw lessons from nature for her has been very fun and very challenging, to be able to get creative and to be able to be like, this is, I try to bring it all back to Jesus. I'm like, and this is, you see how this flower wilts and it goes away, but then a new one comes, and I try to relate it back to the stories that she knows and loves from the Bible. And so that's been really fun. Here we are doing homeschool on the hammock. This is my youngest. She's the one who doesn't let us get too much homeschool done. And then the oldest, and so there we are. We were reading we follow like a Sunlight curriculum, and it has us read some books from Patriarchs and Prophets. I was reading that to them. Here they are. If their grandma saw this picture, she would be very sad because she would not know we had the chicks inside the house. But here we are with some fresh chicks inside the house. This one still squeezes their little necks, but she's very careful with them. And they were just loving having them walking around. Here we are with more chickens. We love chickens. They each, we have, like I said, we have 46 of them, and it's been so adorable to watch. Like my mother-in-law, who doesn't really like animals, and my father-in-law, it's like every night they count every single chicken, and it's like we suffer for them, we care for them, and it's been really nice. Like every night they go in, they make sure they're all there. If they're not there, my father-in-law will get his flashlight and look in all the places where they hide to make sure that they're all safe at night. And in doing that, it's been a very for me, it's been a great experience, because it's like it teaches you like to not be selfish, like it's not just about you, and just caring for them in that way. And animals that most people, not most people, but sometimes like those kind of animals just kind of get tossed. They're not dogs, so they get tossed by the wayside, like they don't matter as much, but they really do. They matter to us, and we really do love them, and we try to care for them to the best of our abilities. This is this year's chicken litter that we've had since spring has been here. It's been nice having all the animal babies. There's the whole crew that hangs out together. So there's Ruth and Orpha and Seth, and then Emmy and Ellie are the donkeys. And it's hilarious to watch the goat on top of the donkey. I'm like, I don't know if all goats do this, but this is really funny. And the donkey, like when she gets bothered, she'll start running, and then the goat falls off. It's pretty funny. So like the kids love to feed the animals. If it was up to them, they'd be so fat, but they love to feed them, and I love seeing them lose that fear for them. So here's my oldest daughter with more chickens on her head. So here's my mom. My mom, like I had mentioned, she grew up in the country, and so here she is helping me. That rooster had gotten in a fight with another rooster, and then he lost his eye, and so we were trying to like put creams and kind of help ease the pain, and we were trying to see if we could save the eye, but he ended up not ever being able to open it again. There we are with our eggs. We have, as you can imagine, we're vegetarian vegans who own all these chickens, who lay all these eggs. So we'll like end up with like 12 dozen eggs sometimes. So we have at church, there's a few families that are, needy families. And so we do take them eggs. My mother-in-law takes eggs to this other mobile home community that's nearby here. And then we have a sign, and we do sell them because we just end up with way too many eggs, more eggs than we could ever even eat if we wanted to. And this year's garden, we decided to expand a little bit more. So if you see here are the rows, we're planting soybeans, we have corn, tomatoes, regular like red pole beans, I guess is what they call them. And then the melons and the squashes and everything. And so it's been really nice, because the grandparents are kind of the ones spearheading the planting. So then we all send our kids out there for some grandma time and gardening time. And so it's been really cool. Here's my oldest daughter's putting line we have to put in the soil. And so she's kind of spreading it on there. And it's nice for them to learn how the leaves, how God put something so big into this tiny little seed that's going to grow, and to watch it, and to watch the first little leaves come up. And then they get so excited when it starts to turn into something bigger. It's really just been such a blessing. And not to overwater, too much of a good thing even is bad. Something that I've been really diligent to try to teach my girls is moderation. It's like, okay, well, we can give them water, but even though water is good, if you give them too much water, they're going to die too. So that's been really, really fun. Here they are. Here's another little cousin of theirs also helping out, picking flowers, planting their own little stuff there. There's some of our lettuces from last year, crops. There's a melon in the background over there too. There's a little peach from one of our trees, and then some more tomatoes. There's some cauliflower, some cabbage. You can see the corn in the back over here. I forget that I can use the mouse. You can see the corn back here, some cabbage, some tomatoes there. There's some melons that we had last year. Last year we had a lot of tomatoes. So here's more tomatoes. And then there's hot peppers and things here. I was actually talking to Garrett in our little breakout groups, and he was telling me how he's never really gardened. And I'm like, man, I'll tell you what, it is harder than you think. When I moved and we were like, yeah, let's plant stuff. I'm like, yeah, let's plant stuff. We go buy some seeds, the tractors apply, you put them in the holes and you move on. Nope, not that simple. Not that simple. So it's been, even though this is only our second planting season, we already learned so much in this 1 month of our second planting season of things that we thought we were going to correct from last time, but then we corrected those things and made other mistakes. Like we had planted some seeds and we're like, we're going to be early this time. Last year, we were waiting to buy the tractor to plow the soil, so then it got late in the planting season. So this year, we're like, we're going to start early. Well, we didn't know that, or we didn't think about, I guess, right, that the plants needed like a lot of light as well to grow. And we got all these like really skinny, like shoots, like very, like they would look like hair thin plants that just toppled over. So we're back at it and starting again. So just kind of all these little things that you learn throughout the process. Last year we planted some corn. One thing we try to do is kind of recycle and use things. And so with the corn, it's really cool because the horses and the donkeys love the husk of the corn. So like anytime we're peeling corn, it's like, and even with our food at the house, it's like, oh, save this for the chickens. Oh, save this for the donkeys. And it's been nice to kind of have this ecosystem that we kind of have to think about so much more than just ourselves. I think that has been the biggest learning process for me. Here you can see the corn growing. Oh, you can see my father-in-law's grapes here on the side too. And then over here is where we planted the melons. There's some rosemary there. More tomatoes. We had lots of tomatoes. And then I kind of put just 2 quotes on here. This one is from Country Living, and it's like, instead of the crowded city, seek some retired situation where your children will be, so far as possible, shielded from temptation, and there train and educate them for usefulness. And that was something that stood out a lot for me, because it was like that shielding concept. A lot of times with the world, even with, what I mentioned to some of my worldly friends, like, oh, we're moving to the country. Oh, your children, we're going to homeschool. Like, oh, they're going to be so sheltered. And they use that word in such a negative connotation, when in reality, the Lord is our shelter, and we should shelter them. That is our job as parents. That is, that is our job, is to shelter them so that they can be pure and just shielded from temptation, so that if we can do that for them, then why wouldn't we? We just only want the best for them. And that idea that sheltering them is such a negative thing is just such a worldly thought, and it's something that's used by the enemy, because you should not be ashamed of sheltering your children. You should not be, because we are their shelter. I want to be their shelter, and I want them to be sheltered. I want to be able to introduce things when I know that it's age appropriate to them. I don't want them seeing these things from somewhere else. I don't want them learning these things from some kid at school. Even concepts like marriage and things like that. It's like, I want to be able to introduce her to in a way that she can understand, and when she's age appropriate. I don't want some little kid on the bus to tell her something that she doesn't need to be knowing right now. So I'm privileged. I feel honored that God would choose me as a shelter for those 2 beautiful creatures of his. And something I have to remember a lot is to try, educating them for usefulness. It's like, yeah, my kids 2-year-olds can recite the ABCs, but my 2-year-old can plant a plant outside. So it's like, sometimes it's really hard for me to not get caught up in that. We live in a very education-centered world of like, this is what education is, when in reality, education is so much bigger than that. It's so much more than that. And I really draw a lot of inspiration from Daniel. And I'm like, in Daniel 1, it says, and his parent, in Daniel, it says like, God, Daniel was instructed in the ways of God, and then God gave him all that other knowledge. Daniel didn't have to do anything for all of that knowledge. God gave it to him because he was a good and faithful servant of God, because he thought of all the godly things first, because he sought the godly things first, because he prayed, because he was the person he was. God gave him the wisdom to find favor in the sight of the king. And so for me, it's like, for me, like, even with the homeschooling and with all this stuff, I'm like, I have to check myself often, because if not, I find myself comparing to the world, when in reality we shouldn't be. like I mentioned in the beginning, God calls us to do something different, to be useful. They have more qualities than just knowing their ABCs that are going to come much more in handy for them. And then this one's from Adventist Home. Do not consider it a privation when you are called to leave the cities and move out into the country places. Here await rich blessings for those who will grasp them. And that's just such a beautiful promise and such a beautiful like comfort, because it is true, you know, sometimes it's inconvenient to not be able to run to Pizza Hut in 10 minutes. But, you know, it forces us to do different things, to eat differently, to plan differently, to think of things differently. And I now understand and see the privilege and the blessing that that is. And it's not, you're not depriving yourself of anything by being further out from the city.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.